Deuteronomy 14 1-29, through the Bible. Chapter 14. Theme: Diet for Israel. Although Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 12 deal with the diet for God's people, we have in this chapter regulations that may be a little clearer than those in Leviticus. The reason for this is that the dietary law recorded in Leviticus has now been tested during the wilderness march for 40 years. Pagan rites forbidden. Ye are the children of the Lord your God, ye shall not cut yourselves, nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead. For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God, and the Lord hath chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself, above all the nations that are upon the earth. Deuteronomy 14 1-2. These were heathen, pagan practices in that day. We see the carryover of this among certain tribes on the earth today, who still disfigure their faces. It is a part of their worship, a part of their religion. God's people were never to do anything like that. In my book, Learning Through Leviticus, I have gone into more detail regarding the clean and unclean animals. The diet that God gave to his people was more than just a religious ritual. There was actually a physical benefit from their observation of it. This has been tested down through the centuries. When the plague broke out in Europe years ago, the Jewish population was hardly touched by the plague at all, while a large percentage of the Gentile population died. So, the people began to blame the Jews for the plague. Of course, they had nothing in the world to do with it, but their dietary habits and living habits had protected them from the plague. We are living in a day of diets of all sorts. Everyone seems to be interested in diet. God has not given specific dietary laws for you and me. It makes no difference whether we eat meat or don't eat meat, as far as our relationship to God is concerned. However, if you observe these laws, you may stay in this world a little longer, and if you don't, it may get you into his presence a little sooner. Now, he will make it clear what animals are included, and which are excluded. Thou shalt not eat any abominable thing. These are the beasts which ye shall eat: the ox, the sheep, and the goat, the hart, and the roebuck, and the fallow deer, and the wild goat, and the pigarg, and the wild ox, and the chamois. And every beast that parteth the hoof, and cleaveth the cleft into two claws, and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that ye shall eat. Deuteronomy 14 3-6. These were the clean animals which they could eat. There were two marks that identified the clean animals. These marks also teach us spiritual lessons. The hoof of the animal was to be divided or separated. That could symbolize the walk of the believer. The separated hoof speaks of a separated life. Now, I know that there is a lot of legalism that is brought into Christian conduct today. There are a great many people who don't restrict themselves to the 10 Commandments, but they have added about 25 others, and they live by them. I do not believe that is what God is indicating by the separated hoof. The word cleave actually has two opposite meanings. Cleaving can mean to break apart, or break asunder, or it can mean to be attached to something. This is also true of separation. One can be separated from something, or separated unto something. The important thing is not to be separated from certain activities or habits, but to be separated unto Christ. When you are separated unto Christ, joined to him, your walk will undergo a radical change. The second mark of the clean animals was the chewing of the cud. The spiritual lesson here is that we should spend time in the Word of God. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. Psalm 1:2. The first verse starts out with, Blessed is the man. The blessed man delights in the law of the Lord, and meditates on it. That word meditate has the idea of chewing the cud. It is illustrated by the cow, which has a complex stomach. As she grazes on the grass in the morning, it goes into one chamber of her stomach. In the heat of the day, she lies down under a tree, or stands in the shade and chews her cud, which transfers the grass from one chamber to the other. Chewing the cud is re-chewing the grass, going over it again. That is what we are to do with the Word of God. We are to go over and over it, meditating on it. Unclean animals fail to meet these two requirements. Some chew the cud, but do not have the divided hoof. The pig has the divided hoof, but does not chew the cud. Such animals were designated as unclean, and were not to be eaten. Also, certain marine life was designated as unclean. These ye shall eat: of all that are in the waters, all that have fins and scales, shall ye eat, and whatsoever hath not fins and scales, ye may not eat, it is unclean unto you. Deuteronomy 14 9-10. Water creatures must be characterized by two visible marks, fins and scales, to be edible. There follows a list of clean and unclean birds. There are a great number of people who try to put themselves back under the Mosaic law, and they know a great deal about not eating pork. So, when one of them begins to chide me about eating pork, I remind them of verse 12. Of all clean birds ye shall eat. But these are they of which ye shall not eat, the eagle, and the ossifrage, and the osprey, Deuteronomy 14:11-12. A few years ago, I had a doctor friend who was a legalist, telling me repeatedly that I should not eat pork. One day, while we were playing tennis, I asked him, "Did you ever eat an ossifrage or an osprey?" He looked at me with a puzzled expression, and said that he didn't even know what they were. I said, "Well, you sure better find out. I might invite you over someday for dinner, and have roast ossifrage. That would be as bad as eating pork." He said, "I didn't know that." So I told him he had better look it up, and I sent him to this verse, and to Leviticus 11. Rules concerning the tithe. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed, that the field bringeth forth year by year. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God, in the place which he shall choose, to place his name there, the tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thine oil, and the firstlings of thy herds, and of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. Deuteronomy 14:22-23. God had promised to bless his people in a material way, if they would serve him. Out of that blessing, they were to tithe for the Lord, from the produce of the land, as well as from their flocks. This tithe was to be eaten before the Lord, at the place of the sanctuary. This would be a special feasting before the Lord. Then shalt thou turn it into money, and bind up the money in thine hand, and shalt go unto the place, which the Lord thy God shall choose, and thou shalt bestow that money, for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatsoever thy soul desireth, and thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou, and thine household. Deuteronomy 14:25-26. If they lived too far from the temple, to bring their tithe of produce or livestock, they could turn it into money, then buy their offering to the Lord, when they got there. At the end of 3 years, thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase, the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. Deuteronomy 14:28. If you examine the law carefully, you will find out that they actually paid 3 tithes. That is, 30% of what they made went to the Lord, not just 10%. It seems that the 10th went to the temple immediately, but also, there was this tithe at the end of 3 years. And the Levite, because he hath no part nor inheritance with thee, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, which are within thy gates, shall come, and shall eat and be satisfied, that the Lord thy God may bless thee, in all the work of thine hand, which thou doest. Deuteronomy 14:29. God wanted the Levites, who did the spiritual service for the nation, to be cared for. Also, note that God had a concern for the poor.